Listen to this episode if you want to jam out on consumer behavior for the next 45 minutes and learn how to create intense emotional connections to your ideal customers without feeling gross about it. Today, we are welcomed by Dr. Chris Gray. He has worked for 3 decades to be a trailblazer in consumer psychology and buyer behavior. We talk all about creating emotional connections with your customer. Is consumer psychology inherently manipulative? How do you actually do this without feeling gross about it? What are some of the strongest emotional connections and psychological triggers that you can use, and how you can tangibly impart consumer psychology strategies into your marketing strategy. This episode is packed. As you know, I study consumer behavior for sport. And so Chris and I had so much fun jamming out on this topic. You guys are in for such a treat with this one. Without further ado, let's dive into this conversation. Chris, you have worked with some major brands, Coca-Cola, Nestle, Nike, Adidas, across the board, some of the most recognizable brands in the world. What do you feel like brands that really make it do differently from a consumer behavior perspective versus brands that just kind of feel lackluster?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer is they never stop learning about their customers. I think that the biggest threat to any company, no matter what your size is failing to keep up with your customer, because the world is always changing. People are always changing. The way we shop, the way we buy, what we look for is always changing. And so I think, it's always a red flag to me when I meet with a company for the first time and they tell me, we've done our segmentation. We know our customer inside and out. For me, that's a bit of a red flag, because if you're not curious, you're not learning. And if you're not learning about your customer, you're going to get left behind, especially in this day and age when things just move so fast. So I think, it is that ability and that mindset of just never ending curiosity. And that's one of the pillars of the Buycologist.
Yeah. Tangibly, how does somebody really learn about their customer? Are you just talking to them? Like, where do people do that?
Yeah, there's so many different ways you can do that. And some of it depends on what you're trying to learn about them. I've been a qualitative researcher for 30 years. And so that's really my forte, is digging into the sort of the deep messiness of human behavior. But there's also, quantitative ways, just simple surveys or using big data, following social media. Those are some ways that, just about anybody can go and learn more about their customer. And depending on where you are in your journey, a lot of the work that I do professionally is with clients that have done a lot of the work, but want to go deeper and want to understand in a more granular fashion what's going on with their customers.
Yeah. I always say, if you know the color nail polish that your ideal customer is wearing, like on their birthday night, you know them well enough. The question I always get is like, Maddie, how do I tangibly understand? And I realize that that's an extreme example. It's just to show the actual details of what you need to know. I think it's really interesting that there really is macro and micro ways to learn it. Micro, you can go and talk to them, you can learn about them. And I think with social media now, there's almost this aesthetic of person, or there's this demographic of person that you can kind of get into little sides of TikTok or Instagram or whatever, that you can kind of see what they're into, what are similar kind of accessories to your product, what are they using right now as opposed to your product. But then I like that there's also these bigger surveys and, more focus groups and things like that you also can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the biggest challenge for any company and any brand, whether you're big or small, whether you sell a service or a product, is how can I resonate with them in such a way that it motivates them to act? And that action can be anything from buying your product or service, signing up for a newsletter, listening to your podcast, or subscribing, whatever that may be. The key to that is you have to resonate with them. You have to be interesting to them. You have to be relevant to them in some way. And so if you're not intimately knowledgeable about your customer, you're going to miss those opportunities. And that's really the work that I do, is digging very deeply into the psychology and understanding, not just at a surface level, but underneath, what are their emotional needs? What are their aspirations that they don't tell anyone about? Where are the places that they feel they're falling short? Because those are going to be the keys to really developing that resonance with your audience, with your customer, so that you can have the opportunity to reach out to them, communicate with them, and convince them that your brand is right for them.
Yeah. So for people that might not know, when we talk about, this resonance and emotional connection, and where are they tangibly putting those things? Okay. So yes, I know your biggest fear is, you're not a good enough mom, or, these things that just are unsaid. How do you actually bring that through in a branding or a marketing perspective? Is it being as clear as possible? What does that look like?
The work that I do, a lot of especially the advanced work that I do, is sure, I ask a lot of questions, but I also listen for what's not being said. I use a lot of what in psychology we call projective techniques. So having people tell a story, have them create a collage about their ideal situation, those types of things. And what we're looking for in those cases is not just the images that they show us, the way they talk. It's what are they trying to tell us? What are they communicating through this that maybe they wouldn't say out loud, but is coming across in these projective projects that they put together? When you understand that, then what you can do is you can find ways to draw a direct line between their aspirations and your product and how your product will deliver against those.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the key, because when you can do that, that's really motivating. I mean, think about your own experience and the brands that you love. Typically what they're delivering for you is some aspiration. They're helping you to achieve something that is very important and very heartfelt to you. And that's a lot of the work that I do, is helping brands not only uncover that, but then how do we develop strategy around it?
Yeah. And then, how can we make your product almost the vehicle to that aspiration?
Absolutely. And developing that sort of, we call it positive valence on an emotional level. So it's, when we think of brands, what brands actually are, they're a cognitive shortcut. They represent something in our minds. And if you're a brand that's really been on top of things, then what immediately comes up for people are positive emotions. And that can be very motivating. Now, on the other hand, negative emotions, having negative valence for your product or brand, that's also motivating, but just in the wrong way. So,
yeah.
That can really lead to a lot of missteps.
Totally. I would love to dive into that, because I do think that, I heard for years, I have business degrees, and people would say, fear is twice as strong as positivity, right? And people are more likely to attach to a fear than they are to an aspiration. But I also think we're in a stage that people don't want to feel shitty all the time. Right. That's why people doom scroll, is we're seeking dopamine. We're seeking these emotion empowerment hits, that if our marketing is actually marketing to a negative, it might be stronger, but are those really the customers that you want to buy out of a negative emotion?
Well, and that's one I hear a lot is, fear and the idea that it creates a stronger reaction. Yeah. And, there may or may not be some truth to that. But I think what's really behind that is it's just easier to connect to fear from a strategy level. It's easy to connect to fear. It's easy to identify fear. It can get our attention, but it's not fear that, in a consumer standpoint, it's not fear that motivates us. It's the resolution of fear. And so, when you use fear, you have to be very, very careful that, one, you're not overplaying it, because then those emotions become connected with your brand in a negative way. And you have to make sure that what you're offering is a resolution, a sound and achievable resolution to that fear immediately, because you don't want to leave them with that feeling of fear. They have to see immediately that, oh, this product or brand can help me get away from that. So I think that, one, fear is a very strong emotion. There's no doubt about it. Unfortunately, I think part of what motivates us from a marketing standpoint is it's just easier than to really dig in and find what are the aspirations behind this? What do they really want that we can draw them to as well?
Well, and it feels so much better to market to positivity than it does to market to fear. You can talk about how this is going to help somebody provide a solution, but you're still marketing to the positive outcome as opposed to the negative outcome of staying where they are. Like you said, it's almost and I don't want to say lazy marketing, but it can be, it's easy to get that initial gut punch of a reaction, but is it really the customer that you want? You talk a lot about empathy in marketing and how it really is such a strong lever. And I think anytime I talk about psychology, I always get somebody that's like, well, this is manipulative. How do you really use empathy within marketing and make sure that it stays on this positive side to guide people's actions, but have it not cross over that border into the dark side of marketing?
That's a great question. And, it's funny because one of the most frequent questions I get or responses I get when I tell someone what I do, I tell them I'm a consumer psychologist. It's almost like Pavlovian.
Yes.
The response I get back is, oh, so you trick people into buying things they don't want. I used to hate that question, but now I love it because it really gives me an opening to talk about what I do. There's a reason why the tagline for the Buycologist is influence customer behavior without feeling gross. That's because I feel very strongly about manipulation, not just from an ethical standpoint. Yes, it's important to me from an ethical standpoint. I want to be able to sleep at night, but it's also because it is far more effective to avoid manipulation and develop positive relationships with your customers. We've all had those experiences where we felt coerced into buying something or felt manipulated, whether that's a pushy salesperson or a false promise or what have you. But what that does, you think about those experiences you've had, that results often in feelings of resentment. We call it psychological reactance, which is the idea that as humans, we like to feel like we have agency in our own lives. We don't like to feel like someone else is manipulating our behavior. And we respond very strongly in a negative way to that feeling. And so if you're a brand and manipulation is kind of your thing, what starts to happen is your target audience, your target customer becomes resentful. They become frustrated. They become angry. And that can lead to avoidance. And if that's how your potential customers are responding to you, you're probably going to have a lot of trouble ahead of you, right? And so it's far more effective, particularly in the long term. Look, we can get anyone to buy something once. That's not an effective business model in the long term, especially. No. And so building resilient relationships with your customers, again, think about the brands that you absolutely love. You feel like you have a relationship with them. And I encourage, all marketers and anyone who's part of a brand to really think about their relationship with customers in the same way they think about relationships in their own lives, right? It takes a lot of work. It takes maintenance. You have to check in. You have to correct any mistakes, all of those things. And I think it's very similar with a customer relationship. And when you can do that, there's a lot of great benefits that come from that. And one of those that's really key is resilient relationships are forgiving. If you think about your best friend, if they screw up somehow, we all make mistakes, right? You're not going to immediately cut them out of your life unless it's something super major, right? But generally, you will try to work it out. You will have faith that they will make good with that or they will correct the action. The same thing with brands. I'm an Apple user. All of my electronics are Apple. If they came out with a product innovation that really fell flat for me, I'm not going to immediately go run and buy a PC. I'm going to, probably express that to them and then hope that and have faith that they're going to make that right somehow or they will course correct. And if you think about that, that really means that now you've got a customer for life. And, there's research out there that shows that customers that are emotionally engaged with a brand are more than 300% more valuable over the lifetime of that customer than those that are not. And so really creating those relationships and keeping them healthy is the way to really keep that benefit for your brand.
Yes. And we teach and we talk a lot about community building here as really thinking of it's not just a vanity metric. It's not just, another follower. It's not just another one-time customer. Is we're looking for retention. We're looking for community. They refer everybody to your product. They're going to talk about it. And so again, if we can have these positive associations, people feel super connected to you. They buy from you over and over again. Your business ends up being so much easier because it's kind of just like this snowball approach of chunk after chunk after chunk. All of a sudden, month over month, you have more people buying because they do have that emotional connection.
Yeah. And so much more enjoyable too. I mean, it's hard to run a brand. It's been one of the most humbling experiences of my life is creating my own business. But, you want to have a business that you enjoy. And if you're constantly dealing with negative customers because you're manipulating, and it just becomes tiresome. There's so many other difficult things to deal with when you're running a brand.
Yeah, no kidding. So when we really talk about emotionally connecting to people, what are some of the psychological triggers that we can try to use or strategies that you do put into place to really create emotional connection?
Yeah, I think the first we've talked about, is really getting to know your customer as best you can. There's no way to replace that. That is step number one, is identifying your target customer as clearly as you can, getting to know them as best you can. I love the analogy of knowing the fingernail polish that they're going to wear on their birthday. That's fantastic. And then going from there and understanding, when you understand them that well, then you start to understand, their aspirations, their dreams, the challenges that they're faced with. And that's where you really can connect with them around those things. And so, finding out what's going to be appealing to them, what are they receptive to, what resonates with them, and then building your strategy and your messaging around those things in a way that's authentic and truly helpful. You're going to find a lot of things about your customer that your brand can't do for them, right? If I am a brand that is, let's say toilet paper, it's great that I know what color their nail polish is because that refers to a granularity of knowledge. But literally, that probably doesn't do a lot for me as far as messaging. It's a sign of I know them well. So you have to really think about then what is my brand and what can my brand realistically and authentically offer? And then find the intersection of those two things. And that's where you build your messaging.
Yeah. Okay. So when we talk about messaging, I'm a nerd for some good messaging because it really is the home of everything that you do, from marketing to community building to knowing your ideal customer. Your messaging is literally everything from your website, your packaging, whatever. When we talk about messaging, is it really just as easy as being as clear as possible around this is the vehicle to achieve this thing?
That is one element for sure, is being clear. I think another is being consistent. And so I think there's a couple of different ways that plays out. One is ensuring that at every touch point with your customer, you're being consistent with not only your message and the words you use, but the experience that you're providing. I once worked with a retailer that was a fairly high-end retailer, and their messaging was around luxury, around comfort, around confidence, those types of things. But when you went to the store and you saw the fitting rooms, they clearly had not thought about that as a touch point to their customer. They were dingy. The lighting was terrible. They just were not a place where you'd want to spend any amount of time. And, I think that's an example of when you're not being consistent in managing your brand's message across every touch point. And so I think consistency is a really important part of that. So being clear and being consistent is really important.
Yeah. I call those transitional moments. And that's really where the customer journey is so important. And a fitting room is such a great example because we've all gone into a fitting room to put clothing on and the lighting is above lighting and you look awful and there's no way I'm buying it. Even if it would look great when I'm on the beach, it looks terrible right now. So I'm not buying it. It's this transitional moment of you deciding. It's you actually making the decision. Am I going to buy this? Those are often the times that we fall flat, that we're just okay, now you have the product in your hands. You're going to buy it, right? Where those are the moments that we need to support people the most in what are these touch points? How do we really want them to feel? When people are making that decision to make a purchase, what is actually psychologically going on in the moment from, okay, I'm interested and I'm trying it on, metaphorically, and I'm pressing checkout.
Yeah, well, there's a number of different types of risk that we think about when we're making decisions like that in the moment. There's obviously financial, so is this something that financially makes sense for me? But there's also functionality. So is this going to help me accomplish what I need to accomplish? Is it actually going to work for me? There's also, thinking about the opportunity. So we think particularly about big ticket items, right? So if I buy this, I can't buy that, right? So if I buy this car, I'm probably not going to be able to buy another car right away. And so thinking about really bringing home that message of why is this right for you? Why is this better than the competition is really important. But also psychologically, does this make sense for me? Is this who I am? And again, that comes back to how well do we know our customer to be able to, really convince them that, yes, we've thought about this and we know who you are. This is why it's right for you as a person. And then lastly, there's also social, right? So, there's a social risk. What are people going to think if I buy this, right? That is a big piece too. And you think about the fitting rooms, right? So, even though the beach is going to have entirely different lighting, you're not at the beach. This is all you have to work with in the moment, right? Is this horrible lighting and I look terrible in the swimsuit and oh gosh, what are people going to think, right? I just published a piece actually today on my Substack about the 5 types of consumer risk and how to overcome them. And so it's really fresh for me right now. So thank you for asking that question. But, those are what's going through someone's mind in the moment that they're buying. We have to overcome these risks. And each product category, each brand is going to have different emphasis on which of those risks are most important to the customer. But the better you understand them, the more likely you're able to help them overcome those hurdles of those risks.
Okay, that's really interesting. Is like it really is understanding what are all the questions that's going through their mind. This is like the girl math of when we're trying to identify. You're like, oh, I'm going to wear this every day. So basically, per wear, it's going to be free because I'm
Right.
going to wear it for 30
Exactly.
years. This pair of $200 jeans, I'm going to own for 30 years. I'm going to wear it all the time. They're basically free. It's like that justifying. And I would love to hear your opinion on it, where people say that they buy from emotion, but they justify on logic. I think Zig Ziglar said that
Yeah.
is the emotion is kind of first what they feel, but the last second is how can we really justify this logically in order to actually make the purchase?
Yeah, I totally agree. Everything that we buy, everything, even the most mundane thing is ultimately based in an emotional need. A lot of times when I say that to people, it's like, wait a minute. What about, underwear? What about,
toothpaste? Yeah.
Yeah. And the example I give now is toilet paper. Very mundane, right? That seems like a very, rational based kind of purchase. Remember COVID? What was the first thing to fly off the shelves when we had shutdown? You can now find toilet paper anywhere. And that is not rational. That is because toilet paper in some ways represents comfort. It represents preparedness. Yeah. It represents taking care of my family. And when we were under the threat of this unknown, pandemic, that was the first thing people turned to was, I've got to stock up on this. And it was not a rational thing. It was a very emotional thing. Now, that doesn't mean it's unimportant. Emotions are very important. They're a very important part of our lives. But yes, emotion is incredibly important to any purchase. And the thing is that emotion, we respond to it and we feel it much more quickly than our rational minds can catch up. So it's just how we're wired as humans. We will have an emotional reaction. We will typically deal with that emotional reaction, and then we will rationalize it in our heads. And so, yes. Zig Ziglar, very smart guy, and I've always loved his work. But yeah, it's very true. And so as marketers, one mistake that I see so often is dismissing emotion. We really have to be rational when we talk to the customer. And it doesn't matter how rational you speak to the customer, they're going to react with emotion. It's just a matter of how strategic you're being about that reaction. And so I always encourage my clients to think about the emotions that they want connected. What is that positive emotional valiance that they want connected to their brand, and then work backwards. How do we create that through our messaging, through our product, through our experiences at every touch point so that it becomes an automatic reaction that is a positive for us?
Yeah. I think about walking through like Target, and you're walking through an aisle that's like kind of snooze festy. Even like Graza olive oil, everybody listening, I've been talking about Graza olive oil for weeks. And just because I think it's such a great case study of how they took like a snooze fest of a category. Olive oil has been very boring, very, mundane for a long time. And then all of a sudden there was something fun and new and like this really beautiful packaging on the counter. The initial reaction was, ooh, like this is cool. Look at this brand and the squirt bottle, and they have all of this. And then after you do that, you start moving into this rationalization of like, okay, but what grabbed your attention was the emotion, the packaging, the branding. And then you start to say, okay, is this extra virgin? Is it 100% this or that? Are there fillers in it? And then they start to almost check off the things on their list that really matter. Cool. Still, I'm in. It's great. Even if it's a couple extra bucks, this is going to be fun. And this is what I care about. It's really interesting. And I always tell people, think about how you buy when you walk through the grocery store, when you walk through Target, when you're shopping on somebody's website. I always say when you start learning consumer behavior, it kind of ruins shopping for you because all of a sudden you're just analyzing every touch point forever. And you start to see how you react and you can see, oh, okay, this is how my customer is doing this. Hey, I've been getting some DMs that you may not know what I do outside of hosting this podcast. I actually work with product-based business owners every single day to help them grow and scale their brand. If you really want my eyes one-on-one inside of your business to look at your strategy, to look at your funnels, to look at your data, and to develop your next campaign or bring your business or your idea to life, that is exactly what I do every single day. I've worked with 500 plus businesses across 70 different industries to help them become the next household name in their industry. If you are craving a business brain, a strategic advisor, a data-centered, obsessed person to come into your business and help you bring your idea to life, I'm your gal. Come on over to my Instagram at This Is Madison page, DM me support. Otherwise, you can click the link in the show notes to apply today. Okay, back to the episode. I also say often that business principles remain the same, but consumer behavior is the thing you have to study in order to stay up to date. And in my opinion, consumer behavior has shifted drastically, even in the last 6 to 12 months. But if we look kind of greater, even COVID within the last 5 to 10 years, how do you really see consumer behavior has shifted even in the last 5 years? And then we can talk about kind of recently.
Being able to purchase something anywhere at any time has absolutely changed the way. I grew up, I was a teenager in the 80s. I grew up in a very small town. We had one department store and that was it. And that was your world. Otherwise, you had to travel, to a bigger city and find things, whatever. And so certainly the ability now to buy anything, anytime, anywhere with just a couple clicks has changed the way that we behave when we shop. And I think that we are much more discerning. We're much less patient with brands and products because I don't have to buy here. I can buy from a zillion other places or a zillion other products. And so I think that that makes that relationship with customers even more important because, it's not like the old days. The saying used to be for retail, stack it high and watch it fly. But that doesn't play anymore. You have to have a relationship. You have to have a reason for being in the mind of your shopper. And then you have to also have a very positive emotional response from them. Otherwise, they can easily go anywhere else. And I think that's a big watch out. I do think with COVID, what was interesting is there was a lot of prognosticating about no one's going to go back to the stores. Physical retail's dead. No one's going back. And, I always roll I've been hearing that for 30 years, my entire career. And the thing is, it's buying products, particularly in a retail environment, in a brick and mortar kind of place. It's about much more than just acquiring stuff. Going shopping provides many more emotional benefits than just acquiring things, right? So it's community, it's relating to others, it's touching and feeling, it's the sensorial experience, it's the certainty of trying something on and knowing it works. There's so many different emotional things that go along with that. I knew, immediately, that's not the case. But what it did do, I think, is it made us much more comfortable with buying online or buying through social media and things like that were just starting to take off. And I think that those really accelerated. But they say in physics, for every force, there's an equal and opposite force, right? And I think what we'll continue to see is physical retail continuing to evolve. I think it was very slow to respond to buying online, and that was part of the problem. But I think we're going to continue to see retail becoming more and more of an experience and retailers thinking about it like an entertainment experience that, you can also buy things here, right? And we start to see that with some of the more successful retailers. I think that will continue, and I think physical retail will continue to evolve as well as any kind of online, digital, social shopping as well.
Totally. I 100% agree. The world of retail, I don't see going away, but I think it absolutely will adapt. We see Lululemon just opened up a shop that has a cafe in it where you're going to go and you're going to sip on a coffee. It's like Target. You go into Target, you get a nice little Starbucks drink and you walk around and it kind of is like a pastime. It's an activity that you're doing. My friends and I live an hour and a half from the closest city. And so if I want to go to a Trader Joe's, I'm making a full day trip to I'm going to go to Target. I'm going to get everything I need done. And my friends and I go as a Saturday activity. We're going to go to Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's is a great consumer behavior case study as well. It's so great. And Target, we get a drink and we do, it's you make an activity of it. That's not going away. People still like to shop in person, but I think what's interesting is the initial touch points oftentimes are online. And then when you're in retail, it's almost I've seen this. I saw this influencer using it, where it kind of creates more of a web where retail used to be the point of discovery. Now it's almost online. And then it's a treat that you see that company in retail.
Yeah, absolutely. I come from a retail family. My family has owned a furniture and boutique store since I was 4 years old. And every once in a while, they still, listen to me, which is nice. But, I tell them the most important thing that you can do as a retailer is just get people in the door, whatever it takes. And an example that I love is Walmart, actually. They really put a lot of investment into their sort of drive up service where you can order online and drive up and pick up your products, which seems kind of counterintuitive to getting people in the door. But what they know that we didn't know is that when people drive to the store, even to pick up their groceries, they are far more likely to walk into the store itself and make more purchases. So it is really just how do we get people in the door so that we can showcase who we are and what we're about and encourage them to buy even more.
Yeah, because you're going to remember the one thing that you didn't do. You're going to be like, I'll just go pop in. Like there is an inherent like excitement and dopamine hit of just walking around a store, even if it is Walmart. Like it doesn't need to be the cutest boutique in town. It can just be walking around. We were just on a trip to the coast and like I call it bopping. Like I just enjoy bopping around a cute little town. And that is literally because it is an activity that people enjoy. So retail, I agree. It might adapt, it might move, but it really is one of those things that isn't going to go anywhere. Kind of switching gears to an e-com perspective, D2C. If somebody feels like their marketing is kind of lackluster right now, they have sales coming in, but it just doesn't feel like people are coming back. They don't have that like sizzle that they know that they could have. What would you be auditing? What would you be looking at to see what's missing?
First place I would go is how well do they understand and connect with their customers on an emotional level, first and foremost, because that is what creates that excitement, right? Is do they get me? Are they providing things that are exciting for me? So, that would be the first stop for me is how well do you understand your customer, not just on a behavioral level, not just demographics, but emotionally? Do you know what's going on for them? Do you know what their aspirations are? Do you know what they enjoy? Do you know how they're going to respond to different types of messaging or experiences? And, I've been doing this for a long time and I've spent a lot of that time working with, consumer packaged goods products. And so, some of those don't seem so exciting. And so I've been faced with that many times. An example was I was working with a company that one of their products is dish soap and dishwasher detergent, right? I'm going to do some research with them, some qualitative research. And prior to that, the brand manager approached me and he's like, look, this is a drive-by category. Nobody cares. They just barely even slow down in the aisle. They just grab whatever they bought last time, right?
Yeah.
And I said, let's have this conversation after because we knew we were going to do this work. He was just convinced there was no emotional need or connection there. And what we found was fascinating. And this really cemented for me that, every category has an emotion at its base. What we found was, the target were very busy heads of household with families, right? And typically female. But what we found was that the reason why they bought what they bought last time was because it was good enough. No matter what claims a new product might make, they weren't willing to take that risk, right? Functionality risk, that this would work just as well because they couldn't risk it because if that went wrong, it created a domino effect in their life because they had these households that they had running like clockwork. And if something went wrong, like the dishwasher screwed up and all the dishes have to be rewashed again, they couldn't risk it. And so, sure, they just grabbed what they bought last time because it worked well enough. And so what we did with the product then was instead of just making claims, we actually created experiences that were proof points, right? So it was, showing before and after. It was having demonstrations. It was showing that this actually worked better. And that made all the difference. But it's because we discovered that emotional need of certainty, right? Of keeping my household running smoothly that we were able to really do that. And it made a big difference with the brand.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's just small little messaging shifts like that can make a big difference as it first comes from the need, the desire that your person has, what's going through the mind of your customer right now when they're making that purchase. And I even talk about this, like as we're recording this, it's the end of March. It's a transitional season of spring. It's another major time of like, okay, I'm doing a lot of reevaluating messaging with my clients right now is what is going on in the difference between fall and winter and spring and summer to your customers. So how can we adapt this for different seasons? Or is it like dish soap is something that doesn't really change, but if you are tea or skincare or something that does make that adjustment is we're constantly seeing who is our ideal customer, what's going on in their world when they're making this purchase right now, and how can we kind of adapt our messaging and our marketing to really touch on those things.
And one thing that I would say, and I don't mean to like contradict you on your own show, the thing I would say is we make those assumptions, like dishwashing soap doesn't change over seasons.
Yeah.
I don't know that for sure, right? So
totally.
I would go in with the curiosity of like, let's test that. Does it? Does it not? What does our customer think? Is there something that maybe does? I have no idea, but that's the thing is like, keep that curiosity open and catch yourself when you make those assumptions. I do it all the time.
Yeah.
I can tell you stories upon stories when I've caught myself mid-research, like, oh gosh, I've been approaching this with an assumption. But that's a great example of like, let's go find out, right? And so, I encourage people all the time, like keep your curiosity alive. Like, and try to catch yourself when you make those assumptions. It's built into who we are as humans. We do it all the time. It's just we make mental shortcuts and ways of making our lives easier and our worlds easier to navigate. But when you can learn to challenge that, that's a really great opportunity for you to develop your curiosity as well as your empathy for people.
Totally. And I think a lot of times we think that we are our only ideal customer. So like how I buy dish soap doesn't change. I'm using the same whatever dish soap, but somebody else that's a mom with 4 kids and, is super busy might think of something else in different seasons. The kids are about to be home and, different things are changing, that it's not just us as our ideal customer. I
think it's one of the biggest mistakes that brands make, brand managers and people associated with brands is, this is interesting to me, so therefore it must be interesting to everyone. And I think that's a great place to catch yourself, right? It's dangerous because not only we miss things, but then confirmation bias kicks in, right? And so confirmation bias, as is when we have a thought or an opinion, it's just the way our brains work. We don't do it on purpose. Our brains look actively for things to confirm our perspective versus things that will challenge our perspective. If we're in that situation and we have an opinion about something and we're not like our customer, we're going to start subconsciously looking for things to confirm our perspective. And we're going to miss out on those opportunities that are really meaningful to our customer, but may not be meaningful to us.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Chris, this has been so great. I love this conversation. I'm sure I could talk to you for literally hours. Kind of to leave it, if there was something that you wish you could scream from the mountaintops about consumer behavior, that people either a major mistake or something that people really need to know. I mean, we've talked a lot about knowing your ideal customer, having curiosity, really diving into the messaging piece. But is there anything that you feel like we haven't covered that you feel like is a key essential piece to this conversation?
One thing I think that's really important, particularly as we're in the world of AI and there's just information everywhere, right? And we have information overload all the time. One thing that I just really think is going to become increasingly important and is very important now is critical thinking, because when we are surrounded with information at our fingertips at all times, but the quality of that information we're not always certain of, I think that's where discernment comes in, and that's critical thinking. And so, as we continue down this path with AI and information becomes more and more readily available to us, but the quality of it is not known right away, I think discernment is going to be an increasingly important character trait and quality that will really separate the great marketers from the ones that have really serious missteps.
Yeah, AI was something that was on my list that we could absolutely talk about. And AI, I have already seen in so many industries how it's impacting consumer behavior in general. And, the idea that AI says things definitively that might not always be a definitive it's almost tricking people into feeling like they have all the answers when sometimes, we've caught AI making stuff up completely where I'll be like, where did that statistic come from? And they're like, oh, you're right. That was not a real statistic. I'm like, wait, that you can't do that. And so if we are kind of blindly trusting these, models that are just giving us information, it's really interesting how that can impact it. Even from a consumer behavior perspective, I've given this example a couple of times. I bought my husband snowmobile boots for Christmas, and I know nothing about snowmobile boots. I'm like, I don't know, boots sound good. So I went right onto AI and I said, this is my husband. This is what I want to buy boots for. This is where we live. This is what he wants. I want him to be multi-purpose. He runs really warm. So don't make him too hot. What should I buy? And they were like, here's 3 options. Great. And I'm blindly okay, cool. I know nothing about it. It allows for us to feel like we're making an informed decision where it doesn't always feel that way as a consumer.
And there's a psychological term for that, which is not new, and it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Dunning-Kruger effect is essentially that the less knowledge we have about a subject, the more confident we feel, because we're unaware of all the things that we don't know. I've been doing consumer psychology. I've been a psychologist for 35 years. I feel like the more I learn, the less I know. There's always something. There's always more for me to learn. And I think that mindset becomes even more important now. And like you said, it's not like AI is coming to us and saying, well, I think maybe this is the answer, right? Yeah. It's like, no, here, boom, boom, boom. And if we just accept that, I'm not against AI by any means. I find it a very helpful tool, but it is a tool. And like any tool, it requires checks and balances. And I think in this case, the most important check and balance on it is discernment and critical thinking.
100%. I was doing my accounting the other day and I sent it something, ChatGPT. I was like, what is this? I'm like, wait, no, that doesn't make any sense. Wait, can you double check that? Because that doesn't make sense. And they're like, you're right. I was looking at the wrong thing. And my whole books would have been totally toast if I would have just blindly followed it and didn't look at it. And this is where I think the difference in, like, when I was in school, we had Google, and it was like, well, I can Google everything and like, I'll at least get something. I'll be able to figure it out. Why do I need to learn some of these things now? Like, I can't even imagine being in school, because you're like, I have all this information, but I'm glad what our information bias has to be now is, how can I look at something critically and really look at it with discernment to say, does this actually feel right, or am I blindly following it?
Right. Or are there other opinions I should be considering? All of those things. There's so many different ways that we can have those checks and balances. And, I think AI is a great tool, but we have to think of it as a tool and not a crutch.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I'm so glad we talked about that. It was on my list we didn't get to. So great. Chris, this has been so great. Where can people find you? Where can they look at the Buycologist? And what are all of your channels?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Well, so you can find me first and foremost on my website, thebuycologist.com. There you can learn about me and my background, as well as what I do, the brands I've worked with, the kind of work that I do. I have a monthly newsletter that goes out once a month, and you sign up and it's for 1 year. So you get 12 issues. Each one dives deep into an aspect of consumer psychology. I also recently, as I mentioned, started a Substack, which I'm very excited about, where I do very deep dives into certain subjects around consumer psychology. And the thing that's important to me when I do this is that it's not just theoretical. I could wax wildly about theory forever. I'm a psychology nerd for sure, but I know that it's not going to be useful to people unless I tell them how they can work with it and what to do with it. And so my promise to any reader is that when I do these deep dives, you are going to walk away with next steps, with tools, with frameworks, with ways to actually apply this to your day-to-day work. And so the title of my Substack is Influence Without Feeling Gross. My handle is Buycologist, so you can find me there as well. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. Dr. Chris is my handle there. And I always look forward to people reaching out.
Awesome. I'll put all of that in the show notes below. Chris, thank you so much for being here. This was lovely.
Thank you, Madison. I've had a blast. This is great.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Business Growth Podcast. We put out new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. So if you love this one, make sure that you're subscribed so you never miss a conversation. If you want more conversations with me and other business owners, make sure that you join our completely free podcast community, the Founders Cafe. The link is in the show notes. You can get bonus resources, access to free coaching calls, as well as connect with like-minded business owners like yourself. Make sure that you rate and review the podcast 5 stars, share it with a friend to keep those conversations moving, and come back every Tuesday and Friday. I'll see you there.